Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. The global economy is in dire straits. Well, that's an understatement. Whether the World Bank, the OECD, or the IMF all have slashed their forecast for 2020. Of course, that's logical. We just had a worldwide closure and standstill of business activity across a very globalized world. The World Bank wrote that COVID-19, and I'm amending this to saying that it should be the COVID-19 shutdown, it would be more accurate, has plunged the economy into the worst recession since World War II. Last year, the global economy for 2020 was projected with a 3.5% growth. This year, by June, the forecasts across the board were slashed to an anticipated decrease of economic activities in advanced economies, that includes us, by 7%. Financial institutions and investor outlook firms contend that the COVID-19 shutdown caused an economic shock 3 times worse than the 2008 financial crisis. Imagine 2008 times 3. Hard to think about. According to the World Bank, per capita incomes thus are expected to decline by 3.6%. This will throw millions of people into extreme poverty. Now pair this with the rising cost of living we're facing. Anyone by now who is going for groceries must have noticed that buying food just got a heck of a lot more expensive in the last few months. Now some are saying the economy will recover in a U-shape, others say an L-shape, and yet others contend a V-shape. Reality is that we live in a world with completely new parameters. New landscapes, new industries, wiped out industries, and nothing but unknowns. So if we live in such a new world with new parameters, how can we apply old parameters to predict what's coming? There is not going to be a single letter type of recovery. And actually, should we even speak of recovery when we already live in a new world with no going back? See the discrepancy? So what is next? Why are we talking about the global economy? Because at the end of the day, we, the people, are affected by the goods we have available, by their affordability, by the jobs we have, and how we manage global interconnectedness going forward. Are we becoming more dependent on global trade or more resilient? What are global hotspots you should monitor because they affect us? How might the elections play out on global trade, goods, and affordability? That's what we need to talk about tonight. My guest tonight is one of the most prolific business authors in the world. A former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce, 87 to 89, and other government appointments, he served as chair for Georgetown University's International Business and Marketing, has appeared as commentator on global trade issues on channels around the globe, and is considered an international trade guru around the world. Please welcome Professor Emeritus Michael Czinkota, and he's right here behind me on the screen. Good evening, Michael.
Good evening, Nicolette, and thank you very much for the comments and kind remarks that you made. I just wish in such moments that my parents were still with us. Not that they would believe it, but they would be suitably proud of their son.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yes, yes.
So, Michael, you wrote a new book called No Bull. Actually, that's the title that inspired us to name our episode tonight, calling it No Bull, seeing what the state of the global economy has in store for us. You want to briefly tell us what your new book is about?
Well, the No Bull was primarily aimed at the promotion and advertising of the book.
Yeah.
But also in terms of writing, the idea being in search of the soul of international business, where all too often we forget that the entire discipline is driven by people, by humans. It's a human activity which we have to analyze, understand, and take preparatory action to help us out with. And that is what the book is trying to do, and thanks to the sales numbers, quite successfully.
That's great to hear. That is very good to hear. So I want to talk in this first segment of the show about the state of the global economy in general. What are major things people at home, so us here, should be aware of in terms of where the economy is right now?
Well, first of all, I should congratulate you to your introduction, which was very much case on point. And you really hit the nail on its head. International business and international trade is arduous, it's challenging. It's like mountain climbing. And the key difficulty is we don't really know what's going to happen, especially lately. When we sit and try to come up with solutions, simple questions like, what do I do with my money? I don't mean mine because I don't have any. But what should people with money do? Where should they place it? Where should they invest it? Where's the risk the smallest? And then we discover very quickly that answers to these questions are very difficult to find because we do not realize how hard we're hit or how even harder we will be hit by changes in lifestyle, consumption patterns, production patterns. I just talked to an acquaintance who is involved with one of the large automobile factories. And he's telling me that his particular company, which I shall not name, has more than 100,000 vehicles parked, not knowing what to do with them, not knowing whom to sell them to, not knowing even where to place them. Can you imagine 100,000 vehicles just sitting there? Scary stuff.
Yeah, and I think actually this applies also to other businesses. If you think about it, all the events this year have been canceled. So from the Olympics to the German Oktoberfest to Wimbledon to all these things. So all the events have been canceled. I've seen lately, even here in the United States, a lot of German Oktoberfest beer very cheaply sold off in different ways of getting it to the people. But they probably sit on a large quantity of massive amounts of beer that has to go somewhere, just to name one example. And with cars, it's the same thing. So was that, yeah?
No, absolutely. You're 100% on target. And it was interesting to see a speech of a German politician the other day who was talking about the suffering of prostitutes. Now you have to know that in Germany, prostitution is legal, except when you have conditions like now the COVID, where people cannot come too proximate to each other. And clearly the government took new rules, new steps, and that of course has a major effect on those, on users and the suppliers of that service.
Yeah, and also not to forget the tax implications that go with that actually for the German government, because we know since prostitution is legalized in Germany, the government is having quite a healthy income from that type of business. So for them, it's kind of like a business. So that's shut down. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the global implications. So when we think about, well, no one really could imagine that the whole world would be shut down entirely. So we have 100,000 cars in the car factories standing around. But then also, how are the smaller businesses and trade on a smaller scale, how is this affected if you can't export as much, if you can't import as much, margins are pretty thin? What are things, is there something we have to worry about, particularly in terms of goods and services for us here in the US that we import currently that might get a shortage?
Well, that may very well be the case, especially with products which are highly concentrated in their production abroad. And here, let me use the C word for China, where lots of pharmaceuticals are produced. And when they are no longer imported into the United States, or only with great delay, then that is very much likely to have an effect on our market.
What happens to the dollar? How does this affect the dollar? All of the global economy right now that's going on.
Well, the United States has incurred a lot of debt, meaning other countries own more in terms of dollars than we own of theirs.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, let's say, if you talk about $1.3 trillion owed to China by the United States, on one hand, scary stuff, very hard to absorb. On the other hand, realistically looking and speaking, China is not going to show up one night at the White House or at the Treasury building, knocking on doors saying, we want our dollars paid back in Chinese currency. For one, they would realize, or they do realize, that it wouldn't happen. Just in terms of the economy, in terms of transfer money, this would not be paid back overnight. Number two, what does China do with the money? Where does it go? Does it go to Germany? Well, in which case, Germany already has negative interest rates. What would they do with all that new money that flows in? So Germany probably would take steps to discourage others from investing, making deposits in the United States. And then this keeps going, of course, because what about Vietnam? What about France? What about the UK? And we have to think that unless we have plans that are realistic and enforceable in terms of money, it is not likely that we will succeed.
Okay, we're getting ready to go into the break. Hold that thought. I want to talk more about this when we come back.
Great.
Welcome back to Smart Sustainability. I'm Nicolette DeVidar. This evening, we talk about the state of the global economy, rather unfiltered, because we are dependent on a lot of goods and services, and the world has come to a complete standstill, and it is important how this affects us going forward, even here in the United States. So my guest tonight is Professor Emeritus Michael Czinkota, and we're right back with Michael where we stopped after the break. So we touched a little bit on China with the medication. We talked a little bit about other countries, the excessive cars that are left for car manufacturers, etc. I want to talk about what the state of the global economy actually means right now for US leadership going forward. Not leadership in terms of who's going to win office, but in terms of the United States was always the powerhouse, the champion of the economy. Where are we, given the situation that we have right now with a completely new evolving landscape of players and of new parameters and completely different modus operandi?
You're making very, very good points. And if you consider how unused we are to current conditions, that highlights how unused we are and will be to changes coming up with these conditions. Let me give you some examples. For more than a century, we have prided ourselves in the United States on the strength of capitalism. Very nice, very happy about that. And if you watch movies, if you read books, if you listen to lectures, everywhere we're told that capitalism is the great thing and is what propels the US forward. But capitalism has as its innate component the word capital. And it means acceptance of capitalism treasures and appreciates the use of capital. But unfortunately, that is no longer the case. We are discovering almost on a daily basis that capital is worth less, and less. And I talk to friends in Europe, I talk to friends in Latin America, and of course in the US particularly. And everywhere we discover that capital is just not worth very much. Instead, we have technology, we have the insistence of people of doing things in new ways, in their own ways. And so all of a sudden, the traditional taking responsibility is no longer responsible of taking it for money, but taking it for decisions, taking it responsibility for plans, for future directions. And we have to be able to go out to people and work with them and design new plans, new strategies, which allow us to take new steps to leap ahead, which is not only based anymore on capital alone.
Yeah, and I actually want to come back to this, but just for our viewers to make it also clear, what do you mean by capital? The value of capital is not worth much anymore nowadays today.
Well, we see that almost daily. If you look at the money you're holding and what you're being given to compensate for you're having that money. So if you are a saver, then traditionally being a saver means you are being rewarded by the system paying you for having saved. Because saving, of course, means delaying or deferring consumption. And therefore you can accumulate capital, and that accumulation, if cashed in down the road, allows you to do things later, better, more enhanced. But this all has gone away. I talked the other day to a friend who tells me that his bank in Switzerland now told him that he has to count on significant 2, 3, 4% payments for the bank holding on to money rather than the bank paying him for giving them the money to hold on. So that changes, of course, our whole decision horizon. What should I save? Where should I save it? How should I save it?
Yeah. Now, of course, one would argue and say, in light of the fact that we probably have so many people that go into extreme poverty, not knowing where to invest your money, if you have it, is probably a nice problem to have over those that have none. Right?
Absolutely. It's you're right. It's a first world problem to some extent.
Yes, exactly.
But at the same time, it used to be, even 5 years ago, that you had an incentive for saving money because that exactly would help you avoid poverty coming down the pike, because you would have some money hidden away, packed away. In Germany, for example, there's always the saying that save money for a rainy day. And then if the rain comes, then you have money and you can cover yourself. But all these basic equations do not appear to hold anymore. And that means, how should companies invest, strategize, develop new directions? And how about us as individuals, which you very correctly highlighted? It's not just the huge amounts that we're worried about. It's sort of the monthly payment to make payments for houses, for health insurance, and maybe also for a little bit of fun. Where does that money come from if nobody's willing to reward us for saving?
And of course, the fact that you can't really save for a rainy day effectively anymore also adds another level of uncertainty for retirement planning and going forward, and putting more and more people at risk at what's to come in a world where we have no idea what's actually coming. I want to talk about a change in the landscape globally that's happening, and that's digitization. So we know that digital transformation, that's been going on for several years, but now due to COVID, it really changes the landscape because it's no longer optional. So you have a lot of different countries who have to either really level up in a way, invest in digitization, but that also, as you mentioned before, now the value is more in technology, for example. It changes the playing field globally in terms of how countries are going to be going forward. Like, for example, if you look at India, I read the other day a report that said India could actually hit a tipping point because they went strongly into digital transformation. So they might be actually set up better than other countries. And there is, in fact, a ranking that the G20 has published for the so-called digital risers. So the countries, I'm going to read that here, just so we have a point to compare. So countries that invested more into becoming digitally more competitive, Saudi Arabia was on the first place, France was on the second, Indonesia third, China 4, Argentina 5, Japan 6, but the United States only on place 13. And the report had also indicated that it actually lost some of its digital competitiveness. So when you think about fast forward, we have digitization means new technical infrastructure. Education is shifting, going more online. Does that allow countries to level the playing field?
Well, it surely allows them to some degree to catch up. Technology, as we talked about, is of extreme importance, but you also have to be able to deal with the technology.
Yeah.
And I often encounter young people who look for the magic career path in order to do well. And they come to me and say, Professor, what should we do? And we talk then about different activities. But for example, with digitalization, very often individuals are not willing or not anxious to try out and learn new activities. They expect that this sooner or later will manifest itself and I just have to pick it up. And then they're very upset and disappointed when I tell them about lack of pickup, that gold is no longer on the road, and that one really has to learn the digital aspects of life and use it to differentiate oneself from other conditions. But it doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen by itself. But as you mentioned, there are some countries who see themselves as key directives for challenging other nations and surging ahead so that they can demonstrate how much better they are. Just now in Ingolstadt in Germany, the headquarters of Audi, the government and the country has made major investments to help with the use of technology, artificial intelligence, in order to be able to forge ahead and not just remain bound and tied to cars as they were the past 50 years, but to develop a newly emerging skill capability which allows Ingolstadt, they hope, to furthermore stay in the leadership for technology and industry. Oh, we don't go to such specifics.
So in terms of who do you think benefits most from the digitization? But it has to be quick because we're almost ready to go in the second break.
Who was most? I think the US has begun to shake itself up in terms of forging ahead, but also other European nations. I think Germany will be among them, but it's a tough issue to consider to be ahead in that field.
Yeah. So when we come back, we'll talk more about hotspots, where you need to look out for, and how it affects goods that you buy every day in your grocery store. Stay tuned.